Thank you, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. And as your barrier to lunch, I will get on with this quickly. And it's been a fantastic program, so hopefully this will end nicely. So this topic is very important for me, and in deciding that this was ripe for research or not, I think it's now time. And I was considering these oranges over the summer in Valencia and how these would transform around now into these beautiful, delicious oranges. So I think we're heading in that direction in terms of the registry, in terms of research, and hopefully my talk will be like that and not like this, which is also a possibility. So what am I going to talk to you about? Well, I'm going to talk to you about bone marrow transplantation from a registry perspective, like not too technical. Registries, their quality and quantity, and specifically what developments have occurred in our registry in Ireland. And finally, some speculation in terms of what could registries be like in the future. The key thing is, as a blood service, we are much more than just the provision of blood components. We also host an international bone marrow registry, and this is fully accredited by the World Marrow Donor Association, the collaborative body for which all international registries work, and it sets our standards as well that assures that we provide quality products for Irish patients and for the rest of the world. What is the registry? Well, it's, at its simplest, it's a database of people who have expressed an interest in donating blood stem cells at some point in the future. They will donate for a specific patient in a hospital anywhere in the world, Ireland or overseas, and they can be asked to donate either one or the other, bone marrow or peripheral blood stem cells. It's entirely unremunerated, with almost complete anonymity between the donor and the recipient. It does vary a little bit around the world, however. And what is blood stem cell transplantation, or bone marrow transplantation, as it's kind of commonly called, although most of the transplantation is with peripheral blood stem cells. And this is for patients who require blood stem cells from another person to replace a failing bone marrow or to keep them in remission from a hematological malignancy. And the donor must be as closely matched by tissue type as possible to prevent rejection and also severe and potentially fatal graft versus host disease. Diseases would include hematological malignancies, aplastic anemia, and now sickle cell disease as indications for transplant. These little diagrams or cartoons I just want to show you because it's very important to understand the logistics of transplantation and also the donation process. So at its simplest level, there's conditioning of the patient, which is the preparation of the patient for immunosuppression to prevent rejection of the transplant and also to eradicate any residual disease. There's the infusion of the stem cells at day 0, and thereafter a waiting period for engraftment, which depends upon the nature of the stem cell source, but will be approximately 14 days. You start to see white cells and then platelets. Now, let's look at the donor. So the donor is doing something at the same time. They've been selected. They're going through a medical workup and infectious disease markers within 30 days of donation. They may need GCSF. They may need to travel maybe 2 hours to their donation center, and then they donate, and then that product is shipped to maybe a local hospital or very far overseas or to a different continent even. Now, that first line can move if the patient becomes unwell, and then the bottom line needs to move too as well. But also remember, that person on the bottom is one of us potentially, and we have our own plans and issues in life, and therefore that can be harder to move as well. But it's very important to bear this in mind, and it's very much part of the work of the registry and also the cryobiology laboratories internationally. Now, who's the donor? Well, it really should be your sibling if you can get it. But the chances are not so good based on meiosis and inheritance. And they also need to be fit and willing. So make sure you are in good terms with your siblings. Don't forget Christmas presents, birthday presents, you just never know. Otherwise, you need an unrelated donor. So this person needs to be a healthy volunteer. They'll donate peripheral blood stem cells or bone marrow under general anesthetic. Or if that isn't an option, there's an option for cord blood from unrelated cord blood banks. Now, what do? We both search and select unrelated donors for Irish patients. We counsel them and prepare them for their donation at the collection centre, which can also be the hospital. We also recruit the Irish donors onto the Irish database, and in-house in the IBTS, our H&I laboratory tests the donor and issues the HLA type, and that data is then uploaded to a local database and internationally. So when people search for donors internationally, they will see Ireland or Irish donors as a code among many others. Now, this is a complicated process, as I was telling you, because those individuals that we're talking about, those potential donors, they are just numbers or names on a database. We don't know necessarily when they've been recruited or how or what was their reason to be recruited at a particular moment in time, such that we may have simultaneous searches going on for multiple donors in different countries. And if those donors are really willing to donate, they will come forward and we will verify their HLA type and check infectious disease markers as well. And when that is a verified donor who's willing to donate, that is then recommended to the transplant center, who will then select that donor for workup, and then begins the game of coordination of when they can potentially donate for the patient. Now, look, the numbers are getting better for anybody who needs a transplant. This is back in 2015, there was 27 or so million donors available worldwide. And as I mentioned, that search process, which what the registry does, we search the local database, which in our situation, it's something called Prometheus software, or international searches is happening simultaneously. Ideally, you'd like to get a donor in your own country because the logistics are easier. Now, what about this year? As I said, it's getting better with marketing and more registries developing. There's now over 40 million donors willing to donate for anybody here who would ever need a transplant in the future. Now, thanks to Nicola for these data, this is showing you how transplant activity has been increasing steadily over time with increasing numbers of transplant protocols and also age eligibility, for example. So a steady increase over time. And to look in particular over the last decade regarding the allogeneic stem cell program, if you look at the total number of transplants in blue, you can see that increasing, but look how it switches in terms of sibling versus unrelated donors. So the unrelated donors are reflecting the main component of stem cell source now. Now, let's look at the dark side of the situation. So this is where we were in 2018, not so good. 62 transplants were performed for unrelated donors, but just 4 were from Irish donors. We shipped nothing overseas, and this was a significant underperformance compared to international peers, and something really had to be done about this. So changes happened. Now, how do others do it, of course? I mean, how do they get so good numbers potentially? Well, multi-purpose organizations like ours, we have a certain amount of resource and we have to do many things with the same resources. There are other organizations. These are large, single-purpose recruitment organizations with a relatively big workforce and budget, and some of which even cross borders. So we've heard about the Anti-Nolan Trust. Another example is Deutsche Knochenmarkspenddatei in Germany, which works over several countries. And also in the United States, you've got the BlooDHIT Registry or the National Marrow Donor Program. These have millions of donors on their registries. So they end up supplying most of the stem cell products around the world. It doesn't mean that individual countries don't have their own responsibility to actually contribute to this donor pool as well. So who is your ideal donor? And this was talked about over the talks so far, but a little revision. Well, first of all, they need to be eager to join. Also, who we want to join. In other words, who's going to be most beneficial and that they'll actually come forward when asked to donate. And also, what about a stem cell donor that's going to sit in a database versus a blood donor who can also donate blood components as well as sit in a database? Because a blood donor can donate many times, whereas registry donors are just registrants until they donate. Now, clearly, it's very important to have as good a HLA match as possible and also a CMV match as possible between donor and recipient. Because as you see there with these survival curves, they drop with mismatch. What about after that? ABO blood group perhaps? But no. The most important thing after that is age. Now look at our registry profile back in 2018. It's not very young, is it? You have a blood donor population, effectively, older. So typical of a blood donor population, just 22,000, kind of sitting around that number with natural attrition and passive recruitment. Now, who would you choose to be your donor if you needed a bone marrow transplant? Well, you're going to want the younger donor because of that survival curve. The other thing is, well, certainly historically, I know things have changed a lot in recent years, but in this very good paper from the laboratory, quite some time ago now, describes us being as a fairly genetically homogeneous population. Think of that in terms of the HLA types. So we got old registry with common HLA types that are seen in British, Northwestern European, and American registries already. So in summary, what we had was a genetically homogeneous, old, uncompetitive registry. Doesn't sound very nice. So, you know, if you're going to choose an Irish donor versus, you know, a younger donor in Germany, for example, you can make a quick decision, I think. So again, something had to be done about this. So we had a new recruitment plan, and this was to be targeted but not discriminatory, to proactively ask a cohort of blood donors to join the registry, but using our existing system, the Health and Lifestyle Questionnaire, and my thanks to, of course, to the Welsh Registry and the Welsh Blood Service for some of the inspiration in this matter. We would continue to do our HLA testing in the IBTS, and this project went live in 2019 in the fourth quarter. So here's the Health and Lifestyle Questionnaire, and I tell you, it's a busy place. It's a competitive place, and getting your question in there took a bit of negotiations. Also, you know, I look forward to the day when it goes digital. So here you can see we asked donors who are 25 and younger if they'd like to join the registry. So actively asking them. But at the same time, if somebody was older than that, we didn't say no, they were allowed to join at the same time. And again, back to this HLA, the HLQ recruitment method. I just wonder what donors think when they've just been asked about snorting cocaine, and then afterwards been asked if they want to join the registry. So we should move on from this, I think, soon. So the results, there was an immediate response, 5-fold increase in registrants, and actually overcome the ability to actually process the samples. And then, unfortunately, on top of that, COVID arrived. COVID arrived and its disruption to teams and work process and workflows. Now, let's look at the outcome again. Let's look back, first of all, at where we were pre-change. It was about 3 years of recruitment of just about 2,500 donors. Have a look at the age profile. Sure, they're younger donors, but they're fairly broadly spread throughout the age categories as well. And look at the y-axis in hundreds. Now look at that y-axis again. Now we're in the thousands. And look at that. Just what we want. Young donors. And interestingly, still a spread of older age cohorts, but you know, nothing like what we want here, which is superb, and over 12,000 donors recruited in that 3-year time window up to date. So COVID unfortunately had its own challenges in that it delayed our sample processing and data interpretation. So there is a backlog of data, which means that some of these donors, although they are registered, they need yet to be uploaded and to be seen by international partners, but that should happen quite soon. So I would predict by the end of this year, we will have transformed from registry of a steady state of about 22,000 to 30,000 and counting. And I look forward to seeing that going up in the coming years. Now, some speculation about the future on registries. Well, first of all, I think it's going to be interesting in terms of what happens with our blood donor recruitment, because with the changes in eligibility and malarial testing and the desire for the O phenotype, will that also encourage such cohorts of donors, blood donors, to also join the registry? And will that result in interesting haplotypes that are not present in our current blood donor populations to be available? And I don't have a slide for this, but this is really important in terms of barriers to access for bone marrow transplantation to actually get a suitable unrelated donor. If you are Northwestern European Caucasian, your chances of getting a fully matched donor, or maybe even a 7 out of 8 matched donor, is pretty good. But if you're from African American or African ancestry, your chances are slim. So getting more haplotypes from different ethnic populations is extremely important. Now, will registries have a role in cellular therapies as well? International registries have thousands of potential young healthy donors who could also donate cells for novel therapies. And such, some of these big registries have started this already. So Anthony Nolan has got its cell and gene therapy services. There's Be the Match Biotherapies in the United States. There's the Gift of Life Biologics, which is an offshoot from another registry in the US, but is actually for profit. And what do you think donors feel about this? Well, there's some initial work published as well. So this is from the Anthony Nolan. And if you look at this on the left, this is showing you whether you'd be willing to donate cells if they're going to be modified before it's going to be given to a patient. So you already know your donation is going to be directed to somebody, but there will be modification of what you donate. But nevertheless, 86% of people surveyed in a kind of a focus group, discussion group fashion would still be interested in donating for research. And I think it's very interesting because going through a peripheral blood stem cell collection is no small ordeal, and certainly not a bone marrow harvest. The Canadian Blood Services have also investigated this, but by a different method. They performed a digital survey by email, with sending out 15,000 emails with a 7.5% response. And the results showed, first of all, perhaps unsurprisingly, that donors would prefer to donate for non-profit organizations. But at least 91% were somewhat interested in direct donation, and 83% for research only, so similar to data to the anti-Nolan. Also, interestingly, there was quite an interest in donating by in a number of tissue types, so bone marrow, fat, skin, and also blood products as well. This new potential horizon is being recognized by the World Marrow Donor Association as well, such that there is now a cellular therapy working group, and they've come up with a donor focus group toolkit for registries to assess if their individual populations in their country would also be willing to donate more than just peripheral stem cells for transplantation. So this concludes my talk, which was to give you an overview of the Irish Unrelated Bone Marrow Registry and what we do. And the developments that have occurred in terms of enhancing the quality of the registry that we have. And to speculate, of course, that perhaps registry donors could also be a source of high-quality stem cells for research or other clinical developments in the future. So I'll let you decide which of these I attain today. But what I would like you to do is, I'm not sure if any of the team is in the audience, but Richard is certainly for the laboratory, to give these people a round of applause, because it's taken a long time to get this team together, and they do all the hard work to get donors for Irish patients and international patients overseas. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Diarmaid. I would like to eat the apples and orange, I should say in English. Any questions? Please.
First of all, Diarmaid, I'm disappointed you don't want me as a donor anymore, but that's okay. Secondly, I suppose one of the questions I get asked, though, and I know it's slightly back to more the beginning of your talk from my patients, though, is can I contact a donor? And they're conscious that in Canada, as you know, after 5 years, their donors and recipients are Facebooking each other, and there's a big, meet and greet, if you like, and it's thing. So I tell them no. You'll be glad to know, I'm sure. But why don't we do it, I suppose? And do you think it's something that should be done?
Well, I guess first of all, what's the evidence base? And the World Marrow Donor Association did publish a recommendation based on a donor assessments in terms of their opinions. And there is, quite a degree of reluctance that exists that maybe some donors don't want to be contacted. But I think you need to be careful just to consider the size of the country and the culture as well. I mean, Ireland's a small place. I just always get concerned that, people could easily identify their donor if they're not careful if the donor is not careful about being, not releasing information on social media, for example, because, perhaps they may need to donate stem cells and again, or might be asked to donate stem cells again for the same patient. What if they weren't in a position to do so for health reasons, family reasons? You don't necessarily want to get direct phone calls from your patient or patient's family demanding. By contrast, again, relating to culture, I was at a ceremony some years ago in the United States where it was done with TV, razzmatazz. There was a life story of the patient and how much it's meant to them. And one of them was actually a comedian at one point. It was part of the show. And then there was the meeting that the donor arrives on stage, and there's, it's very an emotional experience actually, both for them but also for the people who work in international registries to see this meeting happen. So I haven't quite answered your question, but I would urge caution perhaps in smaller countries.
There was one question in the back. please.
If your donors are ideally 25 and under, they've got quite a short valuable life on the register. I was wondering, have you looked at recruiting registrants under 18?
I think when you head into that direction, you're into consent and whether the person is actually able to do so. So even at the age of 25, they're still going to stay on the registry or be of value for, for several years, and particularly so if they actually have, by chance, a less common haplotype. So they will still be potentially chosen in their 40s, for example.